All right, we're going to get started with the last panel of the day, and we understand that we're standing between you and cocktails, so we will try to keep our comments short, and we also ask that during the Q&A section, people also keep their questions brief, if we could. I will call time to the panelists if you run over 10 minutes, because again, I know it's the end of the day. So welcome. My name is Leah Shanley. I'm the co-executive director of the South Big Data Innovation Hub. We are sponsored by the National Science Foundation, and we are one of a network of 4 such hubs around the country. Our role is both serving as a research coordination network, connecting data scientists with domain scientists and practitioners, as well as we just received a grant across all 4 hubs to be an open storage network. So stay tuned for more information on that. And as here on the slide, our role is to build and strengthen partnerships between academic institutions, government, industry, and NGOs to apply data science to regional and national challenges. And also we've had some international collaborations to spur the economy and to foster a big data ecosystem. So the value of big data comes from its ability to improve our lives, improve our businesses, and improve our societies. Applications of big data are seemingly endless, from advancing scientific research to building smart cities to improving our healthcare systems. But as we invest more time, money, and brain power in collecting and analyzing data, we need to be mindful not to collect data for data's sake, but to truly understand the problems we are trying to solve and what data is needed to solve it. The success of big data applications rely not only on innovative technology, but also on the systems that protect our privacy and ensure the responsible use of data. It is incumbent on the data science community and the big data communities to build structures that support the effective, efficient, and responsible use, ethical practices of big data. The full potential of big data also cannot be realized without a knowledgeable, skilled, and agile workforce. The market for multidisciplinary data science skills is growing rapidly, and yet our traditional academic institutions and training structures cannot keep up with that need. And so that we're creating a widening gap between worker skills and employers' needs. So there's an urgent need to strengthen the data science pipeline, which is something the hubs are also tackling, as well as our partners here at PICASSO and the Big Data Value Association. So to explore and identify the potential areas of collaboration between the United States and the EU around data science and big data, the South Big Data Hub, along with the other big data hubs and our trusted partners and collaborators, the PICASSO project, the European Union's Big Data Value Association, and INRIA, organized a transatlantic workshop for big data public-private partnerships last November as part of the annual Big Data Value Association meeting. It was sponsored by the National Science Foundation and held at INRIA in Versailles, France on November 20th. That workshop will be coming out fairly soon. We have a good solid draft, but this panel will highlight some of the outcomes of that meeting. The event convened more than 50 European and US data scientists, clinicians, researchers, and economists who, as a group, sketched out a vision for where big data would benefit society and for cultivating a workforce capable of fulfilling that vision. Several common challenges emerged. I'm sure these will be familiar to you all. Issues around data sharing, interoperability, and standardization cut across every domain that was discussed at the workshop. It was discussed that there was a growing need for data literacy and data capability, and to better integrate data science into a variety of relevant fields. Finally, participants grappled around the ethical and legal questions around privacy, the responsible use of data, public trust, and the potential for unanticipated consequences of well-intentioned efforts. I think that the data ethics cut across every breakout group discussion that we had. Key highlights from the meeting that emerged from the discussion. We had 4 breakout groups, one on environment, one on smart cities and transportation, one on health, and then data science, education, and workforce development. Around environmental applications, one of the key topics was around sensor development, the strengths and weaknesses of sensors, computing at the edge, and how that data can be interpreted and used. Crowdsourcing and citizen science data came up frequently in the environmental discussions. Many of you may be aware with GBIF, which is a global biodiversity database. Citizen science plays a key role in that database and now in others, but we have questions about how to assure data quality, how, if you have all these little pots of data around citizen science projects, how do you store, archive, aggregate that data up to both national and international levels? And some of you may be aware the UNEP is now very interested in how citizen science can augment and enhance traditional data sets to address the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sendai disaster, and the climate accord. With respect to data science applications in health research, conversations focused on the great uncertainty as to whether this data can be scaled, integrated, and shared internationally without violating region-specific regulations or guidelines. I think that was discussed quite a bit this morning. One exciting project emerged out of our workshop that has already been funded. Professor Gary Clifford, who's at Emory University, he's a researcher in the South Hub, out of the discussions with our European colleagues, proposed leveraging heterogeneous data across international borders in a privacy-preserving manner for clinical deep learning. So instead of sharing data sets, Dr. Clifford proposed sharing weighted models across jurisdictions. So there is a growing awareness of the need for multi-center clinical databases and multi-institutional analysis of healthcare data to ensure reproducibility and generalizability of research findings. So as Gary Clifford notes in his abstract, single instance database algorithms are prone to 3 distinct problems. First, the size of the data in single instance databases compared to the number of variables makes it difficult to develop complex predictors without overfitting. Training and testing predictive models on a single database can lead to learning noise from other irrelevant local practices or differences in definitions that are correlated with but not causality related to the outcomes in question. And as discussed this morning, sharing data between institutions, and in particular across borders, is extremely problematic because of trust, legal issues, privacy issues, and national policies. So solving these issues would, of course, allow us to create strong generalizable data science models that leverage enormous pools of data from around the world. So we're quite excited about this project. His project has 3 goals. First, develop a cloud-based infrastructure which preserves regional autonomy of data but allows the sharing of parameters of the partially trained deep neural network with weights and hyperparameters between regions. 2, develop standardized coded model for deep learning approaches in medical applications. And 3, evaluate the effect of training and testing the models across multiple centers and national boundaries. In that original grant that funded the workshop, I have some remaining travel money to bring US researchers back over to Europe. So I'm now discussions with the PICASSO project and the Big Data Value Association about a much smaller but focused meeting, possibly in mid-September, mid-October, in conjunction with the Big Data Value Association convening, and possibly around these health topics. Lastly, Florence, one of our panelists, is going to talk about opportunities for US-EU collaboration in cybersecurity, but I want to mention that our big data innovation hubs, both the South Hub and the Northeast Hub, have working groups or communities of practice around cybersecurity. The Northeast Hub is more broadly focused on kind of traditional cybersecurity approaches. The South Hub, we're focused on what's called cognitive security or social cybersecurity. So the role of social media, network analysis, and security concerns. With that, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Professor Pantelis Angelidis, do I have that right? is the president of Thessaloniki Innovation Zone. For the past 25 years, he has worked to develop ICT health technologies for preventative health and active aging. Previously, he was the founder of Vidavo, a digital health startup in Greece. He was a professor of UOWM and a visiting professor of the MIT Media Lab, which is like rock star. Dr. Meredith Lee is the executive director of the West Big Data Innovation Hub. She's based at the University of California, Berkeley. Previously, she served as an American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow at the Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency and serves on the inaugural National Leadership Council for Society for Science and the Public. Professor Andreas Metzger is a senior academic counselor and head of adaptive systems and big data applications at Poluno, the Ruhr Institute of Software Technology of the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. He also serves as a Deputy Secretary General of the European Big Data Value Association, Steering Committee of NESI, the European technology platform dedicated to software, services, and data, and the Technical Coordinator of the Big Data Value PPP Lighthouse Project Transforming Transport. Dr. Catherine Kramer is at the Data Science Institute of Columbia University, also an active member in the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub. She's been working at the intersection of complexity, literacy, learning, and workforce development for over 20 years. That's a tongue twister. Her work at the Data Science Institute focuses on engaging industry with research and with education. Florence Hudson, our last presenter, is the strategic advisor for the Next Generation Internet for the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub at Columbia University. She serves on the editorial board of the open research journal Blockchain in Healthcare Today. And previously, Florence worked as an aerospace engineer at NASA, so she is a rocket scientist, and spent more than 33 years at IBM, where she served as a director and vice president, leading Internet of Things, cloud and cognitive computing, strategy, and development. And with that, I will hand it over to our first speaker.
That's me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I don't need this. I don't have a deck. So thank you very much for the introduction and for having me here. Good afternoon all. I will start with an observation. Healthcare has not seen the digital disruption that almost every other area of our lives have seen in the past 20 years. So entertainment, traveling, shopping, tourism, financing, trading, you mentioned it. It's not done as it was done 10, 15, 20 years ago. Even governmental services. Our taxes are much more efficiently collected these days. Is our healthcare much more efficiently delivered these days? I seriously doubt this. Why is that? The answer to this why question, I think, is a lead to what data can bring into healthcare. So if you look at it, healthcare is a highly regulated market. So you don't just drop in and sell a device, a drug, whatever. You have to go through a very long clinical trial, certification, regulation procedure, which not only takes time, but it also takes money. This is why a lot of people, among them myself, believe we will never see an Uber in healthcare. Now, the second thing is that it has a unique value chain. So the consumer does not decide. Someone else decides. The physician, the hospital, whatever, for the consumer. And also the consumer does not pay. Someone else pays. The insurer, the payer. So this triangle is a value chain that you hardly find anywhere else, which means that healthcare is not a consumer-driven market. It is a policy-driven market. And that is a thing that one should keep in mind, trying to understand why the app world has not found its way into healthcare so far. The second thing is that from a consumer point of view, healthcare is not a service market. It's rather, as opposed to all the other markets like entertainment, traveling, these are service markets. Healthcare is a trust market. So you don't choose your practice based on the best service experience you get. You choose it if you get to choose it, because you not always get to choose it. If you get to choose it, you choose it because you trust them. So policy-driven and trust, I'll just give you an example how technologies are affected. I mean, technologies in the notion of penetration into the daily life are affected. What is the most promising trust technology we have today? Anyone? Blockchain?
Kind of. It's a piece of it, but it's
All
not
right.
the whole thing.
But just for the sake of the argument, let's say blockchain.
Okay,
Thank
it's
you.
a piece of it.
Blockchain. So everybody jumped in and said, okay, trust, blockchain, that will be the new, let's say, holy grail for healthcare. Right. Then GDPR came. And what is a fundamental right in GDPR? The right to be forgotten. What is the fundamental principle of blockchain? Nothing is forgotten. So as we speak, numerous research groups across Europe are trying to solve this problem, which it wouldn't be a problem shouldn't GDPR hadn't been in effect since May 25th. And what is the lesson learned out of it? It's that we probably need to be much more policy aware when it comes to building our algorithms, piece of software, apps, whatever, you name it, when it comes to healthcare. So someone was talking about security and privacy by design. I think we need policy by design. So when you start designing, you already know what policies will be affected by it. Which means that policymakers probably will need to be much more tech savvy than they are today. Sorry, folks, for you in the room that are policymakers, my sympathy to you, but I think this is the way we're going. So, okay, what about data? I'm trying to avoid the term big data. I'm not very fond of the term. I find it misleading. I prefer data sets that fully represent a phenomenon or a process, and for short, data. So, first of all, do we have data in healthcare? Absolutely. The oldest, most efficient, only self-reproducible IoT system in existence today in the world is the human body. And produces terabytes of data. The good news is we know how to capture this data. We even managed to decode the software, so we have the source code of it. The bad news is, or the challenge, the opportunity, depending on the angle you see it, is we don't know what to do with this data. So a lot of people think that data will finally disrupt healthcare. I'm one of them. A lot of people think they know how data will disrupt healthcare. I'm not one of them. So I think we're only now starting. Someone mentioned in the morning that AI is just around the corner, and it has been there in that same corner for the past 50 years or so. That's exactly the same story with healthcare disruption. So moving from today's disease-centered clinical setup to a more personalized, more preventive, more home and work environment-based healthcare. We haven't seen that. Although a lot of people evangelized, I will just remind you the hype with the wearables 5 years ago, it's gone now. Why? I think we explained a little bit why. But I think because we do have the data and because we are at some point be able to use this data to outrun the experience and the expertise of the one single physician that makes the decision today, in the long run, I think that data and deep learning, machine learning, you name it, learning, will change eventually the way that we understand and we experience healthcare. But again, we need to develop tools that respect policy and serve the trust that that this market needs. And when it comes to machine learning and all these AI things, we don't really know how they work. So a car crashes, and nobody can tell you why this particular car crashed at this particular moment. And that's not good news for healthcare, because, again, the issue of trust does not serve so well. So 30 seconds? I can do that. So what is the answer? There is one thing that is called explainable AI, and I think this might do the trick. And I'll leave it up to you to discuss it afterwards, but definitely this comes again back to the question before. Whatever deep learning algorithms we are going to design for healthcare, these have to be explainable. So again, privacy by design. Policy by design. One last comment. Again, a policy question is liability, and I will leave that for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes, I am going up to the podium. Thank you for the reminder. All right. Thank you, whoever's the AV wizard. Appreciate it. So I understand we, as a panel, are between you and the reception, so I'll try to keep it brief. The previous speaker just alluded to some of the difficult questions, whether it's in healthcare, or I'm going to talk about public safety. We have some other heavy-hitting questions on education and so forth on this panel. But these are all challenges where, at least I can speak for some of the hubs, we feel that no one sector, no one discipline or organization has all of the answers, resources, or insights. And so you'll see some themes throughout, I imagine, the panel discussion about the need for collaboration, whether that's across the Atlantic Ocean or between different traditionally siloed areas of research and development. My name is Meredith Lee. I am the Executive Director of the West Big Data Innovation Hub. So I'm the Leah and Renata of the West. For those of you, I see a lot of familiar faces from Minneapolis, so it's great to reconvene. This is our contact information. Feel free to reach out. Today, Leah asked me to describe some of our lessons learned and future-looking opportunities in one specific example effort that has run across all of the hubs, and that's a National Transportation Data Challenge. She already went through this graphic, so I can skip that, but we as a national network of regional hubs really felt that as we were moving forward with our mission of building and strengthening partnerships across industry, across academia, across all sorts of nonprofits and government at all levels, that we really wanted to address some of these societal and scientific challenges that are on our mind that have been discussed this morning as well, spur economic development and accelerate whatever the big data innovation ecosystem means for you. I would argue that we're all part of that. In terms of the West Hub priority areas, one of the things that we were really keen to get started on right out of the gate was this area of metro data science, of smart cities and connected communities. Particularly, and Andreas I know shares this sentiment, transportation is an area where we really can benefit from collaboration from all sectors. And so you'll see themes that cut across, whether that's cloud or some of the tips that Florence mentioned earlier, ethics, privacy, security, or even looking at the broader picture of data storytelling and how we can do a better job of communicating outside of our silos. These all got wrapped up into our first experiment here, the National Transportation Data Challenge across all of the hubs. This was not your typical hackathon, or I think I've been quoted somewhere, this is not your mother or grandmother's hackathon. We tried to, rather than put everybody in a room with laptops and pizza over a weekend, we tried to design, by design, a challenge that lasted 6 months that included a variety of hackathons, roundtables, policy discussions, tutorials, hands-on learning, where we could really bring together the community and share what has been done up until this point. So we had a lot of lightning talks, a lot of discussion back and forth on how we could build upon each other's strengths and lessons. And we decided to tackle quite ambitiously a very difficult question of how we might reduce traffic fatalities. For those in the room who must be familiar with Vision Zero, this is definitely inspired out of that movement from Sweden. We realized it was a difficult question to ask, is there a distracted driving problem? If so, how might we measure that? We took a lens from design thinking and said, well, if we care about data around distracted driving, why is that? And if you look at the ultimate goal of saving lives, reducing traffic fatalities, that allowed us to take a lens where we brought together all of the different potential contributors and focused on different categories. So within the umbrella of reducing traffic fatalities, we had groups led by industry, academia, government, focused on bike or pedestrian data. We had groups focused on weather or emergency response, looking at evacuation routes, slightly different data sets in mind, slightly different questions and tools. We had a team led by someone from the Governor's Office of Nevada looking at autonomous and connected vehicles, what types of data, new sets from IoT and so forth could be brought to bear on the issue. And we even had a group that was focused on putting together a ready-to-go high school level curriculum around transportation safety and data science. So it was very broad, and as we were doing this effort, we got more and more logos joining the effort, and I recall when we just started planning this, we figured, okay, we'll have a launch in Seattle in May, and then I believe I probably announced at the first Trans-Atlantic Symposium that we would have a finale event sometime in the fall after 6 months. And fast forward a little bit, and it was clear that the community did not want to call it a finale. It was not going to be the end of the road, pun intended. And we decided to call it a summit, realizing that all of this effort going across. You can't see them very well, but there are a bunch of dots on that map that continued to grow, and all of the different stakeholders involved wanted to pledge resources, to mentor, to host their own workshops and convenings throughout this whole period. So you can get a glimpse of some of the resources and additional information on the bigdatahubs.io site. In particular, we have a fact sheet that we put together at the summit. Yes, it's that bit.ly NTDC docs. And you'll see that there were commitments from cloud providing partners and others that go well beyond 2020. And in fact, some of the data sets from the National Highway Safety folks and others are now actually part of the open data portals at Amazon, Google Cloud, Microsoft, et cetera, in perpetuity. So we're really excited about that and the offering of different resources. Next steps are underway, so you can join the mailing list to get more information about that. But really, on a similar par in my mind to the open data and the tool sharing that was brought forth in this, a similar value add was really the people connections. Just a temperature check in the room. How many of you folks would tend to agree that people connections and tech are somewhat important? You're still awake. Good. We're almost there. Excellent. Just also checking for empathy in the room. And online, since we're live streaming. So really, we saw that this governance model, the network of experts, the outpouring of support, and the what I like to call data enthusiasts was really critical. One specific example was a curriculum development partnership that we forged with the Data Science for Social Good team and LRNG, or you could pronounce that learning, which that is an organization that spans 10 different cities, 700 organizations, and on any given year reaches 35,000 low-income youth, primarily of color. And so that's just one snippet of the type of talent and energy that we brought together for this initiative. You should see some familiar faces at our different demos. And so in looking at scale, do I have 8 minutes or 8 seconds? 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay. Different from the numbers here. Gotcha. In looking at scaling up, there are plenty of examples of how this national scale challenge that is still continuing made its way into global efforts. Some of you may have participated in the Women in Data Science Conference. It's now the largest data science convening on the planet. And so we at the West Hub were really excited to partner with Stanford and Kaggle and a number of different groups to launch a predictive analytics competition just this spring with over 26 countries participating. We ended up presenting some of those results to a global community of over 150 different events and 100,000 participating. I need to add the 100,000 number on that slide. So we'll definitely like to connect for the next steps in 2019. But it's not just about getting more and more people to the issue. One example that I'm happy to discuss further is in looking at smart cities broadly. It's not just transportation. It's not just infrastructure of one type. Water infrastructure is definitely important. And so this is the third California data challenge around water, the first where the hubs are involved. We have a launch event just next week. And taking a turn from the National Transportation Data Challenge, we started asking for commitments early on, and we started to see a lot of regional dialogue. Even though we're focused on California data, this is very much a much broader conversation where we'd like to connect with people concerned about water in the lens of smart city availability of all sorts of resources. And this really goes to the point that someone made earlier about capacity. And I would argue that it's the collective capacity of the community that matters for tackling some of these grand challenges. We hosted with all of the hubs in Washington, D.C., a workshop looking at building data science capacity and the type of organizational change that is often necessary to really enable wins for that collective group. There are a number of government folks and so forth in this, and you can still participate in that survey. We'd love to bring in the EU perspective as we discuss all sorts of issues from tech, policy, culture, and governance. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm somehow topic-wise between Meredith and Catherine because I'm doing transport and also skills. I'll try to bring in the EU perspective. And Leah introduced my two hats I'm wearing today as Deputy Secretary General of the Big Data Value Association and also Technical Coordinator of the Transforming Transport project. So we'll touch on both of the things to provide you some insights on the European side of things. I'll start with a very brief introduction on what is the big data value ecosystem environment. And I like to stress it's really value, which is the important piece, not necessarily the big. As Pantali said, the big is maybe just a buzzword at the moment. And the whole ambition of this whole ecosystem is really to understand what is the economic and business value you can distill from data. And to this end, you can see there's 4 different elements of this big data value kind of ecosystem. On the left-hand side, it's the association. It's an industry-led association with 55% of the members being industry members. We're currently 180 members from all the European member states, plus Norway, plus Israel, and in the future, plus UK, of course. I have to do this. Then there's the public-private partnership, which is a funding program of the European Commission, which is kind of funding projects in the total of 500 million euros until 2021. On the right-hand side, there's a specific project which started at the beginning of this PPP, which is so-called support action, which makes sure that the projects collaborate and also has a specific line of activities on skills. And below there are the so-called iSpaces, which are trusted data incubators that give you kind of experimental facilities, knowledge to really play with data in a trusted environment. If you're interested in more about this whole big data ecosystem, feel free to visit the website, which I provided there. And if you go to the PICASSO project website, there's also a recent webinar where you can find much more details about all this ecosystem, including funding opportunities as part of this PPP. The other element I will be touching on is very recent outcomes of this Transforming Transport project, demonstrating what is possible by using big data in the transport sector. This project is a so-called Big Data Value Lighthouse project. It's a rather large beast. It's 18 million euro funding. We are 50 partners across all of Europe. We have 13 different pilots in all the sectors of transport. And the key thing is really to show what is possible with big data, but also, because it's a research and innovation action, show the limits of what you can do with big data, because necessarily not all the data has the information you need and will live up to its promises. So it's really a kind of also a little test balloon to see how far we can push the envelope there. The ambitions are to use big data along 3 dimensions, to provide improved operational efficiency, make the processes better, and there's kind of improvement opportunities in the range of 10 to 50%. It's a very old industry in some areas, ports, for example, ships, very old, traditional. The other dimension is better customer experience, and the third is coming up with new business models, digital business models. I will very quickly touch on each of these 3, giving you an example from the project, just to give it a little flavor, and then I'll lead over to the skills and why we need the skills to deliver all this to the market in the end. So this is the first example that's really a new business model. It's currently being deployed and tested at the Athens International Airport, a very modern airport being opened, I think, a couple of years ago, jointly with Aegean Airlines. It's a Greek airline. part of the Star Alliance group of airlines. And what we're doing there as part of the project is, you could call it data-driven decision-making for retailing. So first thing we try to do is do predictive analytics of how do the passengers flow through the airport, so you can better manage the kind of flow of the passengers, and also have different staffs at the different, for example, duty-free stores. The idea is to adapt the marketing to the specific kinds of passengers. So imagine you have kind of digital billboards, and they can change the billboards to the language of the passengers arriving and maybe also to their preferences. And you can do then the routing of the passengers accordingly. And then, of course, then you can use the typical kind of market analysis to see whether there's some specific products, specific kinds of customers like and prefer. So that's quite interesting. And what I didn't know before this project is 60% of the revenue of an airport is from sales at these stores and not anymore from the actual airplanes. The second interesting thing, and this is more like improved customer experience, is having improved driving and travel experience. And this is a pilot running at, or actually at 2 highways operated by Sintra, a very large infrastructure company also operating in the US as part of the Ferrovial group. And what we're doing there is, again, predictive analytics, trying to better understand the traffic flow. In this case, we have 2 parallel highways, a toll road and a free road, and we're trying to kind of balance and offload the traffic along these 2 lines. Again, providing better information and decision-making for the customers, really showing how much it would take on the free road versus the toll road, and maybe also kind of adapting the tolls on the different times of day. And also have a real-time incident warning, very nice, interesting sensor technology. You have fiber optic cables along all the highways for typical communication across the different kind of signaling elements. And you can use this also now as a sensor. You can really spot the trucks in which speed they go along the road and these kind of things. Very interesting. Final part, improved operational kind of processes. What we're doing here, together with Duisport, it's the largest inland port in the world. It's in the city of Duisport, where our university is located. And the thing is, because they're in the middle of the city, the space is limited, so they cannot grow bigger, but they still have to be more efficient because the number of containers is growing each year. And the idea here is, again, predictive analytics, using the data sources you get from the kind of movements of the containers, of the cranes, of all the machines on the port. Use this to do runtime visualization of what goes on, so the operator has a better insight, but then also, of course, going to predictive analytics. Currently, we're playing with deep learning with very good results to see kind of what are the proactive actions we can do to optimize the cargo flow. And this, in the end, also leaves you to provide enhanced decision support for the terminal operators, because you may determine or observe patterns you haven't seen before, and so you can improve the terminal operations in a more, let's say, medium and long-term perspective. So very interesting things. These are just 3 pilots of the overall project where we have first results, because we're running now for almost 1.5 years. Fun project to work with. All this leads me now over to the skills part, because I have to say we're working in this project with an excellent group of people. They're trained data scientists, they have domain expertise, and it's really easy and efficient how they develop the solutions. But to scale this out, at least in Europe, and I think we have the same situation probably in the US, is we need more skilled people. This is a really recent communication from the European Commission. I just pulled this part here. In the future, 9 out of 10 jobs will relate to digital skills. Data, one of the key things of that. Then if you contrast this to what is the skill set of the Europeans, something like 44% do not really have basic digital skills, so your kind of resources on the labor market gets rather small. If you look at some recent studies of the actual availability of workforce, there's up to 30% gap of skilled people if you accept a high growth rate of kind of data-related solutions. So there's really pressing needs to do something and to kind of increase the skilled workforce. The good news is there's actions having started, so it's not that we are very much delayed, but it always takes time, of course, then to produce the people, because learning and training takes time. And I just pulled 2 really important and interesting activities. One is the so-called Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition. It's a European Union action. And one recent activity they launched is the so-called Digital Opportunity Traineeship, where students and postgraduates can really be at the real industry domain, kind of close to the domain, for a couple of months, up to half a year, and they get a kind of monthly allowance, and they have a budget for up to 6,000 students to really make this possible. So you have your university training, but you can also gain the experience from practice. There's many more of these kind of things, some on the smaller scale, some on a different kind of scale, and there's a really nice visual tool, the so-called Pledge Viewer, where you can see what is offered as part of this digital Skills and Jobs Coalition in Europe. The other activities are carried out as part of this BDVE project I mentioned at the beginning. There's several things like badges for data science courses and also a research and mobility program within the smaller scope of the PPP. But one interesting thing that's also led by my group is the so-called Big Data Value Education Hub. And what we try there is to have a kind of interesting, nice visual repository of the existing European master programs related to data value. Could be data science, could be computer science with a strong focus on data, could be a more domain-oriented business kind of course with a strong focus on data science. And the nice thing is that we currently really have 170 European programs, more on the western side of Europe, so the new member states are a little bit lagging behind. But it's really nice. You can go there, use the bigdataprofessional.eu link, and then you can filter this and search through this, and you see also the different kind of requirements you have, the duration of the courses and these kind of things. And we threw in some nice little photos of the city to attract the students, of course. So with this, I'd like to advertise a little bit the next opportunity of the BDVA. Leah mentioned this already. There was an event last year in Paris or Versailles. We will have another big event this year, November 12 to 14 in Vienna, Austria, the so-called European Big Data Value Forum. Last year we attracted 800 participants. We expect the same order this year. Lots of interaction, networking, discussions going on. So you're all invited to check it out. Just search it on the internet and you see the most recent updates. And with this, acknowledging my projects here, I thank you very much for your interest.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Catherine Kramer, and I'm from the Columbia University Data Science Institute. I want to thank Leah for including data literacy on the panel, and also the Big Data Hubs, and of course the National Science Foundation, which has funded a lot of the work I'm going to be talking about today. So I thought for a little bit when I was making this slide about essential, of course, but right. Is it a right? Is data literacy a right? And I would posit that it is actually a right. And we've heard a lot today about a lot of different kinds of threats. I would hold that having a non-data literate public and workforce is actually a threat. And I'm going to talk a bit about what the need is and what we're trying to do about it. So speaking to the choir a bit, I know we're gathering data at such a fantastic rate now that we're drowning in it, and science and engineering have both been transformed. We're kind of facing a Moore's law for data-driven science, exponential growth, what Jim Gray calls the fourth paradigm. We're in an era in which computer users worldwide generate enough digital data every 15 minutes. There's different, everybody has their favorite metric for this, but since we're in Washington, D.C., enough digital data every 15 minutes to fill the U.S. Library of Congress. I haven't been to the U.S. Library of Congress recently, but I think that's a lot. And our ability to gather data is, of course, vastly outstripping our ability to analyze it all. So what's the problem? The problem is that you can't read the word problem, but what's the problem? Data science has transformed many sectors of society, but the transformation is mirrored across domains and the kinds of skills demanded of graduates, from everything from tech startups to Fortune 500 companies to research labs. We've dramatically shifted away from a focus on individual compartmentalized skills in hierarchies to nimble, highly creative, collaborative, interdisciplinary, and analytical skills. The kinds of questions we ask of ourselves, the degree of complexity of nature at all scales, and the complexity of the problems that policymakers, industry, and citizens are called upon to address are increasingly interdisciplinary and complex. However, the routine, manual, and repetitive tasks are either completely automated or no longer relevant. So what are the needed skills? Some of the skills that data demand include emphasis on the design, construction, and visualization of large-scale data, the federation of multivariate data streams, exploratory, stochastic, pattern-seeking, and interdisciplinary approaches, machine learning, semantic databases and ontologies, and more available and interoperable large data structures. But again, what is the problem? There has been no equivalent transformation in science teaching. The approaches by our education system are the same they were back in the 1950s. Data science is not taught at any depth except for small specialized programs. They're increasingly emphasized in standards, but the uptake is very slow, and the lack of penetration really threatens the pace of technological, scientific, and engineering progress. We do have the opportunity, however, to transform human knowledge with data science, but we need to bring the public with us, which is not only the most ethically responsible thing to do, it's also the only way that this process can continue at such a rapid pace. We need a data literate public, policy, education sectors, and of course, workforce. And this was the impetus for us to start a process to build capacity for data literacy that can scale and to close the gap between all of us in here and everybody else who's out there. So part of this process took place in a workshop that Leah's co-director of the South Hub, Renata, called last fall on keeping data science broad. And there's a report that was published that's online. And what is our basic mandate? That all citizens in the 21st century should be data literate by the time they graduate from high school. In other words, our future workforce. And you can't see that picture very well, but it's a photograph of a little boy looking at the probability machine at the New York Hall of Science, where I used to work. But we say also data literate by the, as should those, all citizens in the 21st century should be data literate by the time they graduate from high school, as should those in the workforce now. So we're talking about the future workforce, but of course also the current workforce. And what those two images are right there, if you can see them down in the lower corner, one of them is yeast, sorry Andres, one of them is protein interactions in yeast, and the other is the internet. And I don't know if anybody cares to guess, or maybe they know which is which, but it's an example of the kinds of things that people are faced with are increasingly intricate data visualizations, among other things, that people are expected to be able to interpret. And we did receive, thanks to the National Science Foundation, a planning grant called Big Data Literacy, Building Capacity for Regional Collaboration and Closing the Big Data Divide, in which we were tasked with creating really a community of practice around learning and education, and identifying and articulating the nature and quality of big data education resources, and potentially drafting a set of data literacy essential principles. Some of you might have seen, I had a few brochures and bookmarks on network literacy, which was an earlier effort that we did. Not to say that this is what data literacy is going to result in, potentially. We are still in the midst of it. Part of the planning grant also is to make recommendations over the next 5 years, come up with priority education strategies, and in fact address the evolving needs of big data education for all sectors of society. So what we did is we called a workshop, that was about a year ago, and we started to develop some of these ideas iteratively, and we did a little bit more of that online. Part of the report, again from the South Hub, we itemized what a lot of these goals are commonly understood definition of data literacy, a handbook, including data literacy in an introductory course, making sure that data literacy is pervasive throughout the curriculum, resources for teachers. I don't want to read them all, but defining the relationship that data literacy has to domain science. A lot of this was about education. And the point that data literacy will be the foundation of fact-based critical thinking. A globally accepted definition of data literacy, and also, of course, coupling data literacy with a discussion of ethics using case studies. We talked about having teacher workshops, developing critical thinking and computational thinking curricula, strengthening foundational math skills, and application-based problem-solving skills. So since then, two things have happened. There was the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub had its summit in March, and we had a data literacy breakout session. So this was a new group of people, and it was kind of eye-opening because in some ways we went back to the beginning, trying to define what are data and what does literacy mean. We also realized that we really do need to significantly and specifically address the workforce skills piece, not necessarily separate from education, but in an equivalent sort of way. And just last week, June 12th, we had our 7th satellite session at the annual Network Science Conference, and there was a brainstorming session on data literacy. So those two worlds are starting to merge a bit. So where are we as of today? We have these draft concepts or buckets. Some of them are concepts, some are kind of bigger than that. Again, what are data? Data interpretation requires critical thinking. Data can be useful. So what is it about interpreting visualizations? Data are neutral, but algorithms are not. To be data literate means having specific skills. Data can be preserved, stored, and retrieved. Issues about data quality, privacy and protection, and of course, data ethics. And our next steps, of course, we have engaged some more support for looking at learning that is currently happening in projects specifically throughout the Northeast. We also have a proposal in to engage public libraries, since many of you, I'm sure, are aware libraries have kind of a new role these days. They've become data repositories and really information centers. We are growing our capacity in community. We're looking for cross-hub collaborations within the big data hubs, but also, of course, very eager to have EU and UK collaborations, and we welcome any of you who would like to join us. So thank you.
Okay, we're getting in the home stretch, and I know you all are antsy to get to cocktail hour, but I would like to welcome Florence Hudson to the stage for the last presentation.
Thank you, the cleanup hitter, as we say here in the U.S. So I really want to thank Leah for her leadership and teamwork and everybody. And y'all, we've already made great networking contacts. I'm very excited about that. So I'm Special Advisor for Next Generation Internet for the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, but I work with all the hubs, they're all my friends. And we try to help each other to further what we're trying to do. And I should say big data can be like, kind of a term that people kind of magnet to, but a lot of it is to do with like distributed big data and analytics as compared to one big data pool. You have, IoT data, you have different parts of smart cities data, you have precision medicine, bringing all these different data elements together. So we really look at all of the aspects of that and support all the initiatives moving forward. So one of the things we've talked about quite a bit today, which I'm very heartened by, is cybersecurity, because that's something that's going to be an issue, I think, forever. at least for my lifetime, even if I live to be another 100 years old, which might be one of my goals. And one of the things that I would really encourage you to do is to engage with us through the NSF Cybersecurity Summit. So I happen to be on the program committee for the NSF Cybersecurity Summit. It occurs at the end of August in Alexandria, Virginia, not far from here, right by our NSF headquarters in our new location. And it includes information security training. The workshop is tailored to increase understanding of strategies for cybersecurity, and it's for large facilities, scientific facilities. But as you think about it, Internet of Things devices are actually managing or connecting to some of these large facilities. And there were some thinking that was going on that, well, you know, if I have like a very specific scientific instrument, who's going to want to hack that? So is anybody familiar with what happened with the telescope during the neutron star collision in Australia? That the server was hacked, so they actually couldn't move the telescope and they had to drive out there. And so that's a single large telescope, right? And people don't necessarily want just a scalable opportunity to hack. It could be specific as well. So we really encourage each other to think through what are all the hacking risks that we have. And so in this environment, what we're going to be doing is bringing a few hundred people together, and I would encourage you to either sign up to participate. The call for participation is due this Wednesday. I'm really sorry it's so short. But we did talk about it on the PICASSO webinar a month or two ago. And we want to talk about science challenges and solutions, security frameworks that you might have, regulations. So GDPR would be a great suggestion, and having someone from Europe talk about it as compared to the US might be great. Integrity and availability, accountability, risk acceptance, all these key areas. And we have plenary sessions, we have panels, we have training sessions. Last year there was a group out of Europe, I don't know if you're familiar with them, WISE Information Security for Connectivity Infrastructures. They had a whole training day led by CERN. And then we have table topics too. So it's more like a lunchtime table topic thing. So it's more informal. You don't have to get up in front of a couple hundred people and present. But we could have, let's say, you know, an EU-US collaboration table topic around cybersecurity, which I would love to co-lead with somebody if you're interested. So if you're interested, you can go to this call for participation. You could probably just Google it and find it as well. Or you could send me an email, and my email happens to be on this page. And also I can give you my card if you like. Another thing we were very excited to do is work with the PICASSO team and on the Think Nexus Consortium proposal to the Horizon 2020 initiative that was due in March. We were able to reach out to many of our team and team members and colleagues across the U.S. and provided 10 institutions with 7 letters of support. We had the 4 big data hubs all on one letter so that could be submitted with the Horizon 2020 proposal. It included the hubs, regional networks here in the U.S., some network operations centers, non-governmental organizations, centers of excellence, universities, and industry players. And so we're really delighted about that, and we're keeping our fingers crossed everything goes great with that. As was mentioned before, I sent Jose a note after we talked about tips for IoT, and he was saying, oh, actually, it could be part of this if we're successful. So fingers crossed for multiple reasons for that. There was also a solicitation from NSF, and the EU and NSF are trying to, you know, have a good capability to provide a solicitation in one side and then a solicitation on the other side where we could work together. Were any of you involved in the ICT solicitation from the EU? Oh, Glenn was, yeah, which is great. Glenn Reichert, who spoke earlier today from US Ignite. And so ICT proposals were due in May, and so that was the collaborative side from the US with research collaboration initiation, and research fellowships. And I think we're going to see fellowships be more important as we proceed too from the NSF side, so you may see more of that. Another opportunity that's coming up, you may have heard that I'm also on the editorial board for Blockchain in Healthcare Today, which is an open research journal, peer-reviewed, where we're looking at how blockchain could be part of the solution of the future of end-to-end trust and security for healthcare. And we actually have a conference at Columbia University in October, and I'll be moderating a panel, and I'd like to find some friends or colleagues from the EU on EU-US NGI for healthcare. What are some of the implications of what we need from a data sharing perspective, a cybersecurity perspective? What do we want to collaborate with IEEE and some of the work they have going on? They have workshops going on around the planet. I just keynoted an event that they had at Johns Hopkins University in Rockville, Maryland about a month ago, and it's called WHAMI, Wearables and Medical IoT Interoperability, and the next one is going to be in Scotland in November. So they're really, IEEE is trying to do these, around the world. So there's an opportunity for us to work together directly, as well as maybe through some other initiatives like that. Regarding standards, we talked a little bit about that today as well. IEEE, the Standards Association is the one that's leading this blockchain and healthcare effort, blockchain for clinical trials, blockchain for WHAMI, wearables and medical IoT interoperability. So I would be happy to participate with any of you on this. There's a lot to be figured out. There's adult supervision required because we don't really have end-to-end trust and security figured out yet. I know I was talking to Vint Cerf about this and regarding blockchain at a meeting at Google recently, and he said this blockchain stuff, we have to talk about this. And he had a couple of concerns, which is very important for those of you who know Vint. He's one of the godfathers or fathers of the internet, literally. And he said some people think blockchain is a panacea, which is why I'm very careful to say it's a piece of the solution. But also, people don't think about how you do really end-to-end trust and security. So if you're thinking of healthcare, if the device is hacked, let's say an insulin pump is hacked, and there are all sorts of examples of that, it could be that the data is incorrect, and then it goes into the blockchain, and then you're perpetuating a lie. That's not good, right? So actually, how do you think of end-to-end trust and security? And some of my colleagues earlier today were talking, I think the woman from Microsoft was saying, you have to think all the way to the chip. So what's the hardware, firmware, software, and service strategy for defense and depth in the device, or in the data vault for the Bitcoin, or whatever it is you're talking about, so that when the data or the metadata does get into the blockchain, you're actually doing good and not doing harm. So there are a lot of implications with this. I would encourage you to participate in this, talk to me more about it. We're also always looking for manuscripts in this open journal for blockchain for healthcare. So if you know of anybody, send them to that. And then if you could participate, I would love to see you at Columbia University in October. We have a few other things that we mentioned actually in the webinar that the PICASSO team held about a month or two ago, so I just wanted to review them again. First is on RDA, the Research Data Alliance, continuing to collaborate around that, and where groups exist around specific data innovation topics, continue to leverage those. If there's some new areas on researcher-to-researcher collaboration that we can enable, let us know. The European Open Science Cloud, we're interested in collaborating as new calls are put out from the BD hubs, the big data hubs in the US. And it could be that, as we start collaborating, we learn from each other and start some new things together. For Go Fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Of course, the international office is based in the EU. We're starting to get it going here in the US. And I'm almost done, and I have 9 seconds, 9 minutes, no, I don't know. 1 minute. Okay, I'm from New York. Hold on tight. Here we go. No, I'm kidding. And so the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, already has some fair focus, and there's more we'd like to do on that. And then there's some research data science summer schools that Code Data, RDA, is enabling. Have any of you participated in that? They sound very cool. There are a couple going on in Italy, and then I think there's going to be some in Brazil, and I think there are a couple of others planned. So maybe there's an opportunity to think about how EU countries and US states might be able to enable some of these together. And we can learn as we build this data science capability. And that's all I have. So I think I made it. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Well, we have 5 minutes before happy hour. And well, so rather than my asking questions of the panel, I'm going to open it up to the audience. I do appreciate for this rapid fire range of issues of possible collaboration around big data or data science between the US and EU. And with that, we have a question here.
Thank you very much for the very interesting panel. I'm Ted Rappaport from New York University. I'm an electrical engineer and computer science and in healthcare also. And I thought it would be really fascinating if all of you could just very quickly, starting with you, Leah, say maybe the 1 or 2 academic homes of your research centers. Are they in engineering? Are they in computer science? Are they in the IT department? That would, I think, be very illuminative for the question I'm going to ask in a minute.
Okay. So the South Big Data Hub is jointly run by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in the Renaissance Computing Institute, and RENCI, as it's known, focuses on open cyber infrastructure, although I'm not myself a cyber infrastructure person. I did GIS and remote sensing.
But from the academic standpoint, is that computer science?
Yes,
or
it's computer science and data science. And at Georgia Tech, they have a strong engineering program and a data science institute.
Computer engineering.
So I'm an electrical engineer. Don't hold that against me, but we should talk. So basically, there's a lot of discussion in the academic community, as I'm sure you're aware, of whether data science is sort of this Venn diagram mix of all these different disciplines, or is it its own discipline in its own right? We hosted recently a translational data science workshop, and the debate there is whether translational data science, taking a cue from medicine, is within the data science umbrella, or is it some other mishmash there? So I guess I would just point to it being extremely interdisciplinary and creative
Right,
at
but
Berkeley,
your
where I
center
am.
on the west, is it in electrical engineering? CS, is it double ECS at Berkeley, or is it in some other department?
No,
What
so we actually created a division of data sciences.
And it's under engineering or arts and
No.
sciences? Where is
No,
it?
it's not. We're our own creative
Okay. And
entity.
so where do you report to? What dean do you report to? in
So
the
my
school?
boss directly, and I mean, this is a longer conversation, is
just
the
a quick
new
answer, I'm just-
dean of the Division of Data Sciences. But the West Hub includes 13 states and so many more institutions, so it's not really the right framework to look at one specific institution. But there is a broader conversation with all the different data science leadership for the specific question.
So I'm from a software engineering institute
Get a mic.
as part of a Department of Business Information Systems.
Business information, okay, thanks.
I'm really curious to hear where you're going with this, but which I'm sure we will in a minute. But like Meredith mentioned, this is really interesting conversation that we've all been in. Is it a field? Is it a domain? So but to answer your question, Columbia University Data Science Institute is now university-wide. So my boss, Jeanette Wing, who's an amazing person in her own right, but more about that later. She reports directly to the head of the university, right?
Okay, so
And-
it's like your own new college.
Well, speaking to what all of us have alluded to about it being interdisciplinary, yes. So we cut across 12 schools. We have 8 centers. We have over 300 faculty. I mean, I don't mean to be giving but I mean, just that it's university-wide.
Thank you, and?
And I'm with her.
Okay,
But the other thing I'll mention is that data science is becoming what I call a gazinta. It goes into everything else. And, so the mechanical engineering departments, industrial manufacturing engineering, they're starting to put data science professors and classes in. Right. So the Data Science Institutes create a focus, so there's like this shining light, this beam, and then
here's
it
where I'm
goes into
going.
the others.
Perfect, thank you all. Great candor. And wonderful, and you don't have to be defensive. I mean, look, you guys are moving at the speed of data and not at the speed of academia, but here's where I'm going with the question. I'm an electrical engineering professor, also Meredith, and I'm also in Courant CS. I'm also in the School of Medicine in radiology. And what I have seen and what all my friends and all the department chairs in electrical engineering are complaining about and are scared about is you see Google and Facebook, YouTube, Twitter paying $250,000 for fresh outs who are experts in data, big data, artificial intelligence, deep learning. It's where the jobs are. And what you see in the US right now, and I wonder if you're seeing it in Europe, is the electrical engineering enrollments rapidly declining. And the opportunistic academics that have courses in deep learning and AI and big data, whether they be in computer science, where a lot of them are, or whether they be new institutions of their own, are attracting huge revenue dollars and huge number of students. But the students don't necessarily get the rigor and the fundamental treatment that an engineering or a strict computer science in the School of Engineering might do, more of an arts and science, more of an algorithm learning, and so they're learning techniques and capabilities, but not necessarily learning the lifelong learning, deep technical skills that will allow them to reinvent themselves when the next big revolution happens 5 or 10 years from now. So as engineering and hard sciences, the worry is, how do you make the pedantic structure and the fundamental format for the students that want these jobs, and we all need it, and you're all doing it. How do you make that work? Because it seems like these new programs and new funding opportunities are coming about, and it's kind of, the students are going there, but how do we make sure the students get the fundamentals so they can be in a workforce that allows them to bring the technical capabilities when the world changes again in 10 years? That's my question for the panel.
So if I may start, but I actually, there's a couple other folks in the audience who could answer this as well. So I come from the geospatial world, GIS and remote sensing. 30 years ago, when I was a student, to date myself, geospatial information science was not a field. It was in the same place that data science is now. It was coming together of civil engineering, geography, remote sensing, different disciplines. We had a remote sensing GIS program, or Geographic Information Science program. The same fears you're talking about now for data science, we heard 30 years ago. Oh, the students won't understand geodesy. Garbage in, garbage out in a GIS system. 30 years later, multi-billion-dollar industry. I don't think those fears have played out. The program that I was in at the University of Wisconsin-Madison had modules, so 5-6-week modules, series of them that students, whether you were in forestry or in history or wherever, you could take those pieces and build that into your other degree that you were getting. I think it worked out okay.
I'm an electrical engineer as well. I don't really share your concern. I mean, it reminds me of the people that are scared of robots that will take.
I'm not sure if I should be concerned or not. I'm just reflecting when I hear department chairs around the country saying in electrical engineering or the hard sciences. So I'm here to learn, and I'm not afraid after hearing you.
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert on this and you will learn anything from what I have to say. But anyway, I think it's important that we teach our students how to re-educate themselves, because the era where you would learn whatever you needed for your career in the university is past for some time now. So whether it is called an engineering, computer science, data science, geo, whatever, I don't really, I mean, you need to understand you need to know the maths to understand the basic principles, and then you need to develop all these skills that will allow you to be nimble and adaptable, because for sure what your career will start would not be what your career will end with. That's my best answer. Sorry.
If I could add just one quick thing. So what I found, I'm on a lot of advisory boards at different universities, is that in some ways, like an engineering department would delegate data science, like, oh, there's going to be a data science thingy. And what we found is that the students weren't really thinking correctly about the data in their discipline. And so that's why I think it needs to be a gazinta. So within this engineering department, we created a data science professorship and a program. And so I think it's important to embrace it and to teach the students really valuable skills, because the ones who are just doing algorithms that are like floating out here that don't have a real need, that's going to be a risk. Not just for the company that might hire them, but maybe for them in their personal career. Very honestly, that's how I feel. I think it needs to be able to be contextual. So I think you have a great opportunity to teach them how to leverage the data contextually. I also think you have an opportunity in electrical engineering to teach them firmware again. That's one of my big pet peeves. So we were talking about, defense in depth strategies, hardware, firmware, software, and service level. Do you guys teach firmware anymore? You do? Oh, you're like one out of like 100 that I talk to. Oh, Oh, my heart. And so as you're trying to create, defense in-depth strategies, you can create new value, or it's kind of like, bell-bottoms came back, now they're flares or whatever. Like you can rename what you call it. But I think you can add new value or re-engage some value in the electrical engineering side to help in this new world.
In my world, I would say, or in my experience, there's a lot of exactly these kinds of conversations going on, and meanwhile, our 100 or so graduates per year out of our Masters of Data Science course, every single one of them are getting hired. And while so it's on the one hand, there's all this anxiety, and is it this or is it that? And on the other, it's all changing so quickly that hang on to your hats or buckle your seatbelt or maybe both. It'll change by the time we get there. It's like the person who said that you call it big data, but by the time you get there, it's not big data anymore because we've already exceeded the capacity to understand that, right? So it's, it's this balancing act, and that's where data literacy comes in, by the way, because that's also a kind of a baseline understanding of how you operate in the world, not just in an academic world, but also in the workforce.
So my answer is, just because you teach data skills, don't stop teaching the other fundamental skills. Mathematics, statistics, software engineering for modeling and abstraction, computer science, algorithmic thinking. I think that's the key.
And design and business and surveying and so forth.
No.
People used to joke that there's like the T-shaped person, and then there's the pie, and then like how many decades is it going to take to get a PhD?
Sorry, Meredith, I have to disagree. The key point is it's the way of thinking, and mathematics teach you a way of thinking, and computer science and algorithmic thinking is a different thing. There's some things you just learn. I mean, I'm a little bit exaggerating. I mean, business stuff you just learn. You don't have to get into a mode of thinking. But mathematics takes some time to get into your head and your head around, and get this out of the curriculum will be meaning you just have this kind of.
And how do you feel about design thinking on this? for future debate.
This is a 10-minute course, right?
So in the time, we're now 10 minutes. I'll just end with that. The other thing the geospatial community did, the geospatial information science, was to begin to create a professional certification. So not a software certification. So even if you had a PhD from an accredited school, you still had to take an exam or do a portfolio review by your peers in order to be certified as a geospatial information professional. And that may be coming for data science down the road.
We're doing that already at NYU, actually. I think some of you are doing that too. But it's just been a very interesting, it's happened so fast.
So we've had Jonathan has waited a long time for questions, so if we could go with him first and then
Actually, I just wanted to pick up on that because we asked for a European perspective. We do things slightly differently in the UK, as you might imagine. I'm a fellow of the Turing Institute. The Turing Institute was originally hubbed, it's still hubbed in the British Library, and it connects Oxford and Cambridge and UCL and Edinburgh and Warwick originally, but we've added 7 more universities. The point about the Turing is within each of those universities we had nascent data science initiatives. But any discipline, any science requires a community of practice to generate knowledge that then gets codified and reinterpreted by critical thinking and then becomes a discipline. You can't have one without the other, but you have to sort of grow them both. So we had originally, in my connection with the maths department, we developed together with computer science a thing that was going to be nascent data science. We called it discrete mathematics because we had to have a name for it. But then gradually, as the Turing Institute got forward, different universities put different disciplines in to coordinate their local efforts. So for example, within UCL, it was the computer science people. Within Oxford, tended to be the physicists. Warwick, for better or worse, it was the statisticians. The reason why I mention that is that different disciplines, even in the same topic, even in the same mathematics, have different ways of thinking. A statistician will believe that the data are the world, and a good model is something that does what the data do, and that's the way they proceed. An econometrician would say, these things got to be data because people thought they were significant, and you have to take that into account when you deal with these masses of data. So that we spent the first year in the Turing Institute just debating what is data science. There are certification efforts that come out of that. It connects across departments, but having that platform where you step out of your identity, your disciplinary identity, and debate things in a way that doesn't cost you your disciplinary rigor. So it doesn't become like information assurance programs, for example, which became sort of quasi-professional training programs and didn't really generate a sort of proper discipline. Probably complexity science did the same thing. So I think there are things, I don't know to what extent they're an artifact of a different university system, but I think that connection across departments is vital. That maintenance of disciplinary rigor and scholarship is vital, but getting people out into places on the back of all this publicity so that they're doing data science. So within the Turing, after the first year of being a data science institute, we became a data science and machine learning AGI type of institute, because we realized you couldn't do one without the other. But we've got network people, we've got people like John Crowcroft, who are sort of fathers of the internet and so on. We've got hardware types, and they all kind of come together. I don't think it would have the same character if they didn't. So I'm not sure I would design a data science program except as a separate entity that was cross-linked into other departments. But I would encourage the organic growth of one on the back of this sort of fertile atmosphere in policy and application.
Outstanding comments. Thank you. One last question, if we may. We're 15 minutes over for happy hour, so.
All right, thanks. I'll be quick. Just to make one comment, actually, just from Florence's last slide, last bullet point, in fact, which was on ICSU's Code Data Standards Initiative, which we've been involved with, actually. But it's just interesting that they've intentionally embraced the participation of social scientists from the start. And I think everyone should look out for the fact, of course, that ICSU, the International Council for Science, is merging in a few weeks with the International Council for Social Science. So we'll see some interesting things, but I think that we might close this can of worms that's already been open until cocktails. But my question actually, maybe for Meredith or Andreas, which is a bit more specific, do you have any examples of smart city or IoT approaches that integrate systematically cybersecurity risks from the last session, cybersecurity risks together with climate risks, so that that's, for example, natural hazards, catastrophic risk modeling, extreme climate events, and forward-looking climate data with impact forecasting. So those two together, my organization contributed to a report with Resurgence that was published by UNISDR, Open Data Infrastructure for City Resilience, and we found that there wasn't much of that at all. Thanks.
Sure, this is also a longer point, but I think the community definitely started to take note. I led the White House Innovation for Disaster Response and Recovery Initiative back when I was in DC. I guess I am in DC right now, but back when I lived in DC. And that was part of many different communities that plugged into data.gov, and so climate.data.gov was one of those, and naturally there are a lot of conversations at the federal level and then bringing in state and local actors and universities on whether we could build that community of practice, like has been mentioned, to help get more of that discussion. It's definitely needed. In terms of concrete examples of groups that have started to integrate, we found that for example, let's take like the city of Las Vegas. I was just mentioning to Glenn that they're one of the few transportation focused groups where the policy, the sort of implementation, strategic planning, and so forth are all under the same umbrella. And so I guess it goes at that siloing problem a little bit differently and saying, well, you know, you've got this one team, and by the way, the city of Las Vegas hosts the equivalent of a Super Bowl every week, and so there are a lot of opportunities to try to strengthen the resilience, both from, you know, the sort of traffic congestion perspective, and then also with that backdrop of what are you doing in terms of energy efficiency and so forth. But I think a deeper conversation is definitely warranted, and the community in general could do a much better job at making that easier for policymakers moving forward.
Andreas?
Simple answer, no, I don't know.
That's quick.
All right. Well, with that, we'd like to thank Svetlana, Vasilis, and the PICASSO project team for inviting us to organized this panel, as well as the Wilson Center for hosting. We look forward to connecting with all of you over the breaks. There are a couple of other big data innovation hubs folks in the room. Stan Aholt in the back there on the left, if you raise your hand. Chaitan Baru is the data science advisor at the National Science Foundation, if you'd raise your hand. So please come find us during the breaks. Thank you very much.